Songlines is Roots in World Music publication, and it's internationally renowned. So getting a CD on there is essentially putting the message out across the world.
Absolutely.
You're working with the musicians to do that. And I think this is something that really interests me as well, because I can remember interviewing someone for something I was writing, a feature I was writing about Iceland's music scene. And he was saying that Björk was a better ambassador for Iceland in terms of selling Iceland than anyone in Iceland's diplomatic service. And to what extent do you enlist artists to promote the country? Because say something like Hamburg Marketing, which is extremely advanced in using music to promote the city, if they're going to do an expo or some trade convention or some cultural event, they will actually take Hamburg artists over to perform, right from indie bands right up to classical musicians. And that essentially is using the musicians, or not using, the working with the musicians to actually sell the destination.
Absolutely.
But outside the actual destination itself. I mean, do you do anything like that with Icelandic acts?
This is a very delicate matter, because I'm sure if there are any musicians left in the audience that...
They've all run off to the A&R seminar.
Yes, that this is not often the most pleasant gigs that the musicians get. But in the tourist service and in the diplomatic sector, there is a demand for musicians to decorate other events. And as an agency, as Iceland Music Export, we actually participated in some of these activities, but we tried to link it with or make other activities that we created benefit from it. And there's been some great results in that. We are working with a guy who runs an agency called Iceland Naturally, which is partly governmentally funded in US. He had this idea of promoting Icelandic music in college radio stations, linking it with some kind of food promotion from Iceland or whatever. And I presented him with an idea that we wanted to do and that we had. And he then decided to fund that idea. And in return, we advised him on some musicians that would be available to participate in his promotions. But there are two sides to this coins, because it's always a little bit of a conflict on whose terms are you doing this on. Is it on the terms of the artists or the terms of the promoter of other products? And you have to be very clear what it is that you're trying to do, and to make sure that the promoters of other products, they are not necessarily helping that artist.
So I mean, it's a matter of being delicate about it. I mean, I think that it's an interesting point, because with Hamburg Marketing, they did something at an expo in Beijing, so that it wasn't like they had the artist singing in some horrible trade hall or something. They actually organized a concert with a big Chinese musician, so they ended up performing together. So it was more like a cultural exchange. Yes. And there was an element of sensitivity there. And a lot of the other things they do are more music specific. So if they go to South by Southwest or Eurosonic, which is a specifically music-oriented event or events, in both those cases, you go there and you'll pick up a magazine all about Hamburg. They'll be selling the city at a music event as well. So it goes in the other direction too.
And this is when they have realized how to use this. But in my experience, there's had to be a lot of dialogue in trying to get people who are marketing other products to understand that this is not a charity for the artist to allow them to play there. This is actually something that they are using to attract people emotionally into other products, whether it's fish or travel or whatever it is. And that needs to be quite clear, and they need to pay the artists who are doing this, because it's just buying a service from an artist. But of course, I think the tourist industry will more and more realize that they can actually promote themselves through music events as well. and that's happening in the case of Hamburg, for example, and to some degree in Iceland it has happened as well. But it's kind of, the reason I say it's delicate, because I've had some experiences that people think that artists should always be grateful to get an opportunity to play wherever it is. And I'm just saying, for professional artists, it's not. And it can sometimes be almost, and that's what I'm quoting artists that I've spoken to, almost humiliating for them, the situations that they put into. And we as professionals in the music industry, we have to be careful that we don't just grab any opportunity for any money that we're given.
And I mean, one thing that interested me when I wrote about the Music Export Office, am I right in thinking you had the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Economics, Foreign Ministry,
yeah.
But did the tourism industry contribute to the funds as well?
No.
Okay.
It was the sector itself that initiated it and contributed with funding, and then those three ministries. And there was a bank. This was 2007. The bank went out of it 2008 because they all collapsed. But they contributed quite generously when everything was still on the up in Iceland.
Did you get to keep the money as well?
Well, after the collapse, there was no money to get from
Right,
them.
but you got it wasn't like they owed you anything.
No, I have to say it was jolly times, because the owner of the bank was on my board, and every time he came to a board meeting, some few more gold coins would go my way.
Has anyone got any questions? We covered absolutely everything that you could possibly want to know.
Are there any people in there that run festivals?
Someone waving at the back there. I saw a
Yeah.
hand go up. Right. Actually, you've got some experience in this as well, haven't you? I mean, in terms, is that Jeff Thompson at the back? Could you tell us, because I mean, you do your unconvention events in some pretty unconventional places. Essentially, they're grassroots festivals for helping young musicians, and they take place all over the world. I mean, how much do you work with the local organizations to promote the places as well? Is that
we've worked in a lot of countries and there's not one answer. I think there's some really interesting things happened. One of the probably standout ones, we did an event in a place called Medellin, which is in Colombia, which its only reputation it had up until sort of 4 or 5 years ago that it used to be the most dangerous place in the world. So that was their marketing tool. And what happened there is, I mean, there's obviously some huge problems in a place like that, but they tried to turn that around, and they got a guy in as mayor who was an architect, and he realised that if they put money into interesting things happen into quite bad parts of the city, that reputation could perhaps change quite quickly, and it really, I think it's worked. They've built museums in the barrios, libraries with free internet access. They put hip-hop schools out there, and then they get people like us to go over and do some events. And, you know, it's spellbinding what's happening. We're just about to do one in Venezuela, whereas by the guys who run those kind of music projects can go into the office of the president, Chevaz, and ask for money directly. Sit opposite him on a table and go, we need some money because we want to do a music project because it'll engage. Now, these aren't necessarily in respect of tourism, it's to engage their own community. But that then has a wider impact. You know, you get to hear about these things, and it sort of turns the bad stories into good stories, and then that proliferates out. So
this is a really interesting point about the own community, because this goes for Aldrei in Ísafjörður, that there's much more Icelanders visiting Ísafjörður, this small fishing village now, after the music festival started happening. So it's not always just attracting foreign tourists, it's to start attract your own tourists.
I think that's a really important point to make as well, because the UK music tourism study last year didn't actually it counted, well, the nations within the UK, but if someone went from Orkney down to the Wickerman Festival in Dumfries, that wasn't counted as a tourist because it was still traveling within Scotland. So those sort of elements I think are really interesting as well, what actually, how it motivates people within a country.
Yes.
There's internal tourism as well.
There certainly is. I mean, we can take that from the tall ships last year in Shetland. The tall ships visited a number of ports, including Greenock in Scotland, Ullapool, Stornoway. Lots of opportunities to see just the ships themselves. But when they came to Shetland, we had a large music programme. We had a good headline acts, but 90% of the acts were Shetland. And the statistics say that the biggest number of visitors we had for the tall ships, in fact, about 45% that came from out with Shetland were from Scotland. So everybody had the opportunity to see the ships in a much more cost-effective way, but they chose to come to the package that was Shetland. We had probably the biggest music event to the Scottish calendar for the tall ships. It was their excuse to come to Shetland. All they needed was that motivation of, a sporting event like the tall ships race coupled to a big entertainment programme. As I say, 90% of the music was Shetland. We were able to put in headliners like the Levellers, etc., for a special night for the locals. But there was no doubt that the biggest impact on tourism was from within Scotland, and thankfully they measured that and the benefits that came with it.
Okay, so I think the message from this is that if you are working in tourism, then it's probably time to wake up to some of the opportunities that can be offered by the music scene, and at the same time do it with a sensitive approach and make sure that you still have a respect for the musicians and the scenes that are doing it. And then we will take this subject a bit further this afternoon in the round table discussion. We also have coming up a panel on something we've called Just Around the Corner, which has everything from printing headphones onto a piece of paper right through to alternatives to apps if you don't have the money to develop your own app. And we also have a panel about music hotels, which will be very interesting. If you've ever wondered why hotels are piping terrible music through their lifts, or why other places are able to be very musician friendly. There's not too many in Scotland, but hopefully that'll change soon. Then come along to that. And if you want to check out the remains of the A&R You Brave Enough panel, where various musicians have submitted their music for critique from the A&R panelists yesterday. That's just across the square at the third door, which is you go in through Negotiants and go down the stairs. It's downstairs there, so feel free to have a look at that. And I think the next panel, Mike, is 1:15. They're great. Okay, thanks very much, and see you in a little bit.